Welcome to Reframed. Join us as we explore the concept of redemptive business in our unique context on the African continent.
Hello, everybody, and welcome again to Zwane's Risk Reframed podcast, where we explore real-world risk that leaders face in business and how faith shapes the courage to take bold and responsible steps. My name is Ashton Fourie. I will be your host for this session, and with us we have Jeff Phiri. And Jeff is a logistics and leadership executive with over 30 years at DHL. He started as a customer service agent in 1995, rose through operations, country leadership, global roles, and now he leads the leadership development and culture across sub-Saharan Africa, covering more than 50 countries. Born and raised in Bulawayo, Zimbabwe, now based in Johannesburg, Jeff is passionate about leadership and mentoring, faith-based development, and the African growth story. Jeff, welcome to you. It is great to have you here. Please take a moment to introduce yourself as well.
Great to be here. Thank you for that wonderful introduction. My journey started in Zimbabwe. That's where I was born and raised. I studied economics at the local university there. Then in 1995, which is a long, long time ago, I joined DHL as a customer service agent. And I grew to that role, like you said, country role, regional role, global roles, country leadership. So I've done it all. Operations. I've worked in multiple countries, Zimbabwe, the United Kingdom, South Africa, where I'm based now, Saudi Arabia, UAE, Malaysia. I've worked on all those countries. And in each country, there is something that you learn. But the key importance about that, it's a privilege that God gives us to be able to travel. So this is something that you need to do. So I've had this unique experience and opportunity to work in different countries, to travel so many countries as I was deploying operations, applications and so forth. So, but it has given me a perspective of appreciating what we have. Yeah.
Something I would like to quickly just touch on before we go into, I want to talk a bit about the global conflict and logistics, but before that, you mentioned about the inspiration that you take from Nehemiah and how that influences and informs the way that you approach life and your approach to risk and integrity and purpose. Tell us a little bit more about that.
Great question. In the Old Testament, one of my heroes is actually Nehemiah, and it's his approach. And I wish many of our entrepreneurs in Africa and indeed across the globe could actually follow his approach to risk. Everything, he went down on his knees. So he prayed first. That is his template. He prayed first, then he planned carefully, and finally he stepped forward with courage. That is what Nehemiah did as he was building the walls in Jerusalem, which took 52 days, and by God's grace, he was helped. So even my faith has always been central to that. What I do, leading a men's ministry at our local church, mentoring young leaders through my charity called Limitless Leadership Place, or Bible Fellowship Study, BSF, and at church we do something for our entrepreneurs and those that intend to start called Biz Life. So all of that, I'm actually guided by Nehemiah. So I'm glad you've asked that, Ashton. So my passion is actually helping people lead with courage, integrity, and purpose, and in complex environments. I need to stress that running a business in Africa is not child's play. It's really, really tough. You need to understand the terrain. You need to understand the local nuances, the local culture. All of those become key. But what is your grounding? And for me, the grounding has been Nehemiah. I find Nehemiah very inspirational. So if you look, Ashton, he was building with one hand, but guarding with the other. That's risk. Yeah. He kept focused. He removed distractions, because there can be lots of distractions. Do you adopt a growth mindset, or do you adopt a fixed mindset, saying you are seeing only problems, whereas others are seeing opportunities within those problems? So this is what Nehemiah was always thinking. So you need to keep the big picture, keep your mission on track, and say, this is my mission. Do not worry about other things. The noise is peripheral. There is always some risk as you are building that wall, as you are building your startup, as you are expanding from, let's say, South Africa to Southern Africa, to East Africa, to West Africa, to North Africa, and vice versa. You always need to be looking at risk. What are these risks? And taking actionable mitigation, because that is important. Taking actionable mitigation, because it's one thing, Ashton, to identify risk, but what do you do about it? We must lead with courage, integrity, and purpose, because risk is all about purpose-driven leadership, in my opinion.
I love that. I love how you're connecting risk back to purpose. Let's get a little bit onto the practical situation that we're facing right now. So, I mean, you probably more than anybody else we've spoken to, or probably even a lot of people listening, are directly impacted by what's happening with the Middle East and the way that this has affected global logistics. Can you tell us a little bit about that, how you've approached it, how it impacts what you're doing, and your response to that?
Absolutely. So, Ashton, if you look, risk is actually real time. That is the first point that we need to discuss. That risk is real time. Overnight, boom, February 28th, the war starts, and everyone is scrambling around. Airspaces are closed. Some aircraft with people and goods were actually turned around. They never got to the Middle East. They were turned around. Some had traveled 16 hours. Some had traveled 10 hours. They did not reach there. So the airspaces were closed to protect the integrity of the airspaces. Flights overnight were cancelled. Hundreds and thousands of flights were cancelled. Shipments were stuck in ports. The fuel price, they just exponentially increased. Right now, Ashton, Jet A1 fuel has gone up by 70%, a whooping 70%. It's unbelievable. So if you look at a ticket, it's just crazy now to fly. And most of the airlines, using risk protocols, they've actually had to pass a fuel surcharge. So you see your base ticket is more or less the same, but the fuel surcharge could be 2, 3 times, 4 times the price of the base ticket. So now customers were panicking. You know, we carry life-saving medication, we carry urgent things for various customers. And now they're saying, where's my goods? Where are my goods? What's happening? And it becomes really, really tough. And what we did was, every savvy business, and this is an encouragement to entrepreneurs and startups, they must have a crisis management protocol. That's what is important, because you must have business continuity. What happens if this happens? This is what we do. Who is the owner? How often do you review? So we had to activate our crisis management protocols, rerouting aircraft, securing staff safety. So this is number one. Our people are our greatest asset, and we mean it. So safety first. So to make sure that our people in the Middle East are very safe, so we secured them. Then, my background in customer service comes through. But leadership is all about knowing your customers. So it's communicating with the customer. Say, this is the situation that we're in. What can we do? How can we help you? We are making a plan, because customers, they don't want to hear the problem. They want to hear the solution. Again, that's risk management. So what are you doing about it? Yeah, we understand there's war. Mr. Customer, shipments are stuck, but we are prioritizing. We've come up with plan B. We've come up with plan C. We've come up with plan D. So when there is a crisis, do not just rush into trying to solve it, because you miss some other things. You need to take a step back and have an eagle's eye view and say, what is happening? So what are some of the risks? What is the impact? Likelihood and impact. what are some of the mitigating things? Who is the owner? The ownership talks about accountability. Then once you have had that accountability, you can come up with the risk mitigation. So when I look at Nehemiah, because I want to juxtaposition what is happening in the Middle East with Nehemiah, he demonstrated how to lead in uncertainty. How did he do that? He combined faith with action. And that is important. We must pray, definitely. We must assess the situation. And more importantly, it's pointless just to assess. What do you do there? Then what? That becomes a question. Then we must act. We must act.
I really love that. I'd love that faith and action and how those two interplay. Something that also struck me just as you were speaking was the preparedness, how you as a business didn't wait for the crisis and then sat down and said, well, what are we going to do now? You had your, what did you call them? The risk protocols in place. And these obviously were designed and thought through when there wasn't a crisis. So in the time of calm and in the time when things are predictable, you thought through the process of what will we do when something goes wrong. And obviously you could not have said, what will we do if a war breaks out in the Middle East and the Strait of Hormuz gets closed for X amount of days? But you could have said, what would we do if a war breaks out that has global impact? What's interesting about this is that in this scenario, there was a whole lot of things you could not control. However, there are other things that are within your control. How do you manage those conflicts between things that are outside of your control versus what is within your control?
We know that we can't stop any geopolitical events that are happening because those are outside our control. But what is key is, are we prepared? We looked at different alternative flight routes. Some were longer, but they still got the goods to the end user, which is great. And we have a hub and spoke methodology that aeroplanes fly to one point, then we do the last mile delivery. So what we did was we established multiple country hubs so that you could easily move your operation from one place where there is conflict to another place that doesn't have conflict. The key is preparation must travel faster than the uncertainty, because you must always be ahead. You must always be thinking ahead. So risk management is anticipating what is around the curve, what is around the bend of the road. That is risk management in its simplest form.
I think that's amazing. I'd like to change tack a little bit. One of the things that we spoke about when we prepared for this conversation was your experience. You've been with DHL for many years, and you were with them before they were bought over by the German holding company that they now belong to. And as I was thinking about some of the things that we spoke about, I kind of thought of German culture and South African culture, or African culture in general, but South Africa is where I've spent most of my life. And I think as South Africans, one of the things we are really, really good at is responding to unexpected events. On the moment, coming up with new ideas. There's an Afrikaans saying, 'n boer maak 'n plan,' which translates to a farmer makes a plan. And it basically speaks about whatever happens in the moment, we can come up with a plan to deal with it and cope with it. If I think of German culture, I see careful and meticulous forward planning. And I'll quickly tell a little story of something that happened in China, and then I'll ask you to comment on this. But I remember in China, there's a city called Qingdao. It's a city that was built by the Germans around one of the biggest beer factories in the world. And a few years ago, the water system, somewhere of the underground water system, one of the valves got stuck. And they looked at this and they needed to replace this valve. And somebody succeeded in finding one of the engineers that had worked on the original design of that whole system in Germany. The guy had been retired for many years, but they found him, they got hold of him, and they sent him photos of what had happened. And this guy said to them, if you go 5 meters from the valve and you look in the right-hand wall, you will see some bricks that are of a different color. If you remove those bricks, behind them, you will find a replacement valve. And they did that. And they found a like 60-year-old replacement valve, vacuum sealed in oil, that they were able to take out of the wall, fit in where the broken valve was, and everything worked well again. And this saved them the effort of having to custom make, because nobody makes these valves anymore, obviously. But that kind of forward preparation, I just looked at it and I went like, that is a testimony to German engineering and forward planning. How has it been like for you with working in Africa, but with a German holding company? I think there's so many differences in the way that we approach life and cultural differences. Tell us a bit about that experience and how that has been for you.
Thank you, Ashton, and great storytelling there. So working for a German company in Africa, a global company, it's just been one of the biggest privileges that we've had. Why do I say that? It helps us with alignment of integrity because the Germans are cut and dry. You know, their culture, their business culture just emphasizes discipline, compliance. Compliance is huge. Transparency and accountability. If I look at these German cultural business norms, they are actually aligned with my own Christian convictions. You know, in Africa, the perception, if you look at Transparency International, they talk about corruption as being one of the biggest risks that we face, because in many countries it's normalized. But now, with working with the Germans, compliance, discipline, transparency, you know, we have that organizational backing to say no. And we've got a framework that helps us to say no. So it becomes easier. What actually helps with all this that I've talked about for working for a German company is that it builds lasting trust with the employees, with the other stakeholders. So that has been such an immense privilege working for a global company that has got great values that are aligned with our own values.
That's really profound, I think, the lasting trust and the relationship between trust and risk.
And this is what we see in the business environment. It's that, but let's step back. It's the uncertainty. In the business world, it's not a bed of roses. So there are lots of uncertainty. So overnight, a regulation comes up that your business should not be 100% owned. You need some 50% ownership should be with the local business entity. So now it creates uncertainty. So now the risk there is, so there's this new rule. What do we do? That's when some people that don't have frameworks, they start corruption, they start bribing, they start doing all the things that are actually are wrong, because now the environment is so much uncertain and people do not want to apply their minds to think and say, what could we do differently here? And still operate within this new risk thing. So then they start taking these very, very ill-timed and ill-disciplined moves that in the short term they look fantastic, but in the long term, because you must be thinking of legacy, you must be thinking of something that lasts in the long term, you get you get into trouble, reputational risk, jail time, the company being deregistered and so forth, because you were operating in uncertainty, but you did not take a step back and, like Nehemiah, pray and say, God, give me wisdom. What should we do? It's all about trust. Trust matters in business. Trust matters with authorities. We deal with lots of regulators, you know, like SARS, customs authorities, government agencies, and so forth. And they believe dealing with us because they know that our risk profiles are great, our frameworks are great, that we are a focused business. So for us, integrity matters, trust matters. We know how to manage uncertainty because we can't control it, but we reduce. So there's some mitigation that we take to reduce that uncertainty so that we make informed business decisions that can stand the scrutiny of being reviewed. So we usually ask ourselves this question: this decision, what if it appeared in tomorrow's newspaper? Will it stand the scrutiny tomorrow's newspaper? Because whatever decision you take, you need to say, can it stand public scrutiny? If the answer is no, do not take that decision. That is a practical risk management. Yeah.
I really like that that move from sort of, as a company, you've got your risk protocols, you've got the company backing you, you've got these big risks coming in. How do you respond as a company? And then moving on to, what does this look like for you personally, and what happens with you personally as you face certain risks and you respond to those risks, and the risk that comes with responding to that risk in the wrong way, or in a way that actually introduces personal risk into your life in terms of reputation. And that test, I love that test of, what will this look like in the newspapers tomorrow? I think that is a test that many of our leaders can definitely learn from in today's world, because some of the stuff that we read in the newspapers, you really look at and you go like, what was the guy thinking? But what we often don't know is, what was the guy facing? So tell us a little bit about, in this, you travel, you work in more than 50 countries at the moment. You've traveled to over 90 countries. You've worked all over the world. You've worked in different environments with different risks. But in all of that, you are still Jeff Phiri. You're still a husband and a father. Personally, what risks do you face, and how do you manage that from a personal perspective?
When you travel, one of the unique risks that you see is around integrity risks. So you get lots of temptations, Ashton. You are alone in hotels. You've traveled for many hours to get to that place. I have stayed in Malaysia at a hotel for 6 weeks. 6 weeks. Now, one of the challenges is that Malaysia is 6 hours ahead of South Africa. So to communicate with the family, when I'm up, they're sleeping. When they're sleeping, I'm up. So you have to balance those two. So what do I do? For me, at a personal level, in terms of my personal leadership, is I need to protect my integrity long before it is tested. So you don't protect it when you are under test. It's before. It's, if we use the analogy of a football match, you don't just step into the sports field. There is preparation that you need to do. It's the same on the road, when you're on the road, because on a normal month, 2 weeks I'm home, 2 weeks I'm away. I'm traveling to one of the countries that I actually serve. So the leadership on the road requires discipline that we talked about earlier on in terms of the German business culture. Discipline is required. And again, it's that question that I posed. What will happen to my decision or my action when no one is watching? When it appears in tomorrow's newspaper, that becomes a thing. So there are lots of risks. When I travel, you're alone in the hotel, different cultures, different norms. I remember, again, I was, just to share another story, I was in Malaysia, and the locals, they love, just before they eat, they love to do massages and so forth. They go to massage parlors. It was against my values. So I told them, guys, I'll eat at the hotel, or I'll meet you once you're done with your massages. I'll meet you then, because I am grounded onto my values. I have guardrails. I have clear personal boundaries and guardrails, and those ones are non-negotiable. The other thing to safeguard in a practical term is I have a structured routine. I love exercise. I love going to the gym. I love training. For me, it's important. It keeps me grounded. It keeps me from trouble. So I stay focused onto the purpose. What is my mission? Not the noise. So I am inspired by Nehemiah. In Nehemiah 6:3, he says, I am doing a great work and cannot come down. So even for me, my trips are not holidays. I am going for a purpose, and it must be mission accomplished. So I refuse any distractions, just like Nehemiah. So I refuse any distractions. So I stay focused to the mission. I have accountability partners. I have values and personal boundaries or guardrails that help me. And they've helped me for this long, because I haven't implemented them from yesterday, for a very long time, because one of my first mentors taught me something. It was my first trip going to Hong Kong with my former boss. I am quite tall, Ashton, yeah. I'm very tall. So my steps are quite large. And my boss was a very diminutive man. But people at the airport were in Dubai airport going to Hong Kong, because we flew from Johannesburg into Dubai, then we connected Dubai to Hong Kong. They saw this big guy chasing this very short man. And it was a spectacle, because he told me, Jeff, in life, we must value time. There is no time to waste. There is no time to waste. So, and these lessons, I received them 27 years ago, and I still apply them. And even the people that I'm mentoring, because I'm paying it forward, I also tell them that value time. And Ashton, in Africa, one of the things that we do not value, unfortunately, is time. We must protect our time. So again, on a personal level, we need to, when you travel, safety risks. These are also something that comes. So it's not only integrity risks, which are huge, and many entrepreneurs have fallen, but there's also safety risk. Some countries, different countries, they will require some security escorts. There are movement restrictions. You cannot travel, move around after a certain time. There are curfews. Recently, we were in Europe, and a colleague of mine was taking smoke break. So he was outside the hotel, and he was also checking his WhatsApp. And 3 men just came, bumped him, and they snatched his phone. They snatched his phone away. So before we travel, there is some assessments that are done by our security department, and they do risk assessment, local intelligence, and they send us. We never travel to any country without their okay. Risk is not to be avoided, but it is to be managed wisely. What I'm sharing there is just wise management of risk. So it's all about wisdom and trust, which we talked about at the beginning.
You're a senior manager at DHL, which keeps you busy. As you said, 2 weeks out of 4 every month, you're on the road. You're actively involved in your church. You're involved in men's business activities, various things that you mentioned as we were talking. How do you manage the risk of burnout, of running out of time, of overcommitting yourself, whilst you are having this tremendously packed calendar and living this high-paced lifestyle?
One word: focus. That is the answer. It's focus. So one has to have a laser focus about, what do I want in life? What is my purpose in life? Many people do not know their purpose in life. So I do so many things. I do so many things for the church, my charity, Bible study fellowship, the work that I do, mentorship in the office and outside the office. But my strength is God, and God gives me wisdom. And the wisdom that is missing in many people, you know what, Ashton, is? The power of saying no. The power of saying no. Many people fail because they want to please everyone. They want to please their neighbors. They want to please their friends. They want to please the stakeholders, and they want to show off. I have that ability through God's grace to have the power to say no. When I travel, there are some non-negotiables. I stay at a hotel that has a gym because I exercise, because it avoids me getting a burnout. I watch what I eat. I have a structured life. I wake up every day at 4:30 in the morning, and I do my devotion. So your morning ritual defines the success of the day. Do you wake up, Ashton, in the morning, and the first thing that you do, you pick up your phone because there's FOMO? What happened overnight? What happened in Iran and so forth? the posting on Facebook and WhatsApp and so forth? Or do you wake up in the morning and be grounded in the word? Because the key for me is to have laser focus, know my purpose, know why I'm here. You know, Ashton, some people slept yesterday and they did not wake up. So if you woke up today, you must ask yourself this question: why am I around? What is God's intent for me? There's a purpose. Our people in Africa, they are juggling so many balls. You cannot be effective. You cannot have excellence if you are juggling so many balls. You must have laser focus. You must be intentional. You must have the power to say no. Some of these things are not adding value.
I think you've touched on a few things that for entrepreneurs are so important. And I'd like to just pause for a moment to reflect on that. The one being intentionality and focus, of being able to be so clear to say, this is where I'm adding value, and to myself, to the people around me, that aligns with God's calling and purpose for my life. The other is the routine, the power that you put in routine, and the value, the importance that you put on that routine, and how that interplays with getting the energy to do the things that you're saying yes to. I think a lot of entrepreneurs see saying no as a risk, because what if the thing that they're saying no to is the thing that might have just opened the door to the next opportunity? And so they say yes to everything in an unfocused hope. But what you're saying is that there is focused intentionality in doing that which we are here for. It sounds like everything you're telling me, it sounds like the perfect life. Like Jeff has these perfect routines. It's always a gym. He never puts a foot wrong. Is that the picture, or do you have some story of where maybe sometimes you also struggle?
Let me put a disclaimer, Ashton. I am not perfect. I'm fallible like any man. This is the disclaimer. And I have learned so many lessons. I have scars on my back. I have scars on my kneecaps because I've fallen so many times. But the key is, each time that I've fallen, I've learned a lesson. At university, I was in the SRC, and I was also studying but working as a subwarden. So I looked after a residence, and I started focusing. I had mission creep, so I stopped focusing on my studies and started focusing on the peripheries. This is where I learned the lesson. And one of the subjects, I didn't even attend 75% of the lessons. I did not. And the result is I failed that subject. And I had to repeat one subject for an entire year. And that's when focus and intentionality came through. That's where I said, I need to have boundaries, and the noise, I need to tune down on the noise. And it started there. In my professional life, we're doing a due diligence around a potential buy. Wanted to buy an e-commerce startup. We're doing the due diligence, and we put our guard down. I don't want to go into the specifics, but we put our guard down. And because the people that we're talking to, they were charming. They were very charming, and we were blindsided. And before we know it, that business deal didn't go well. It didn't go well. We were blindsided. But we learned key lessons from that do not always rely on people talking. Get down to the nitty-gritties. All these experiences that we go through, and they are numerous, it's what have you learned from them that you can apply, that you can share with others, so that you encourage them, so that you inspire them that, guys, it's not a bed of roses. Yeah.
It is really fascinating how you integrate the way that from a corporate perspective you manage risk, the way that you manage risk from a personal perspective, the way that you bring it in from a faith perspective. There's one last thing I would like to cover before we move on, and that is if you could give us a brief overview, just moving back to the sort of more technical side of it, and specifically from a logistics perspective. What are the key logistics risks that you see, especially in Africa? And how do you manage that? So if we've got entrepreneurs operating in the space where logistics is an important part of their business, how would they address that? What are the key things they should be thinking about and looking at?
Ashton, I think this should be another podcast in future. We'll cover this, but I'll try and do justice to that. And how I want to frame this great question once again is firstly, let's look at a macro level. Let's look at these because will help entrepreneurs. They need to understand what are some of the top risks at a global level in the logistics business. So the framework that I'm using here is 5x5. So I'll quickly look at 5 risks at a global level. Then we zero in at 5 risks within Africa. And one can do a gap analysis and already see some similarities and some differences. So if we look at the global risks, we've talked about the war in the Gulf. So the first one is around geopolitical and regulatory risks. They are always there. Yeah, supply chains get disrupted overnight because suddenly there is a war in South Sudan, so the airport is closed. There are trade sanctions that have been imposed. Customs rules have changed. You're importing dresses, and the duties that you're expecting was 1,000 rands, but now they've changed the rules, and the customs duty is 20,000 rands, and it affects your figures. Border shutdown. So this is what we have, and there's impact of this. So the message on this global risk is around that you react in hours, not days. You do not have time like a politician to call a meeting and discuss and so forth. You react in hours. So you have to be nimble. You have to be very adaptable in terms of making that. So that's the first risk. The second risk at a global level is around fuel price volatility. I've talked about it. Avgas or Jet A1 fuel has gone up by 70%, and the airlines are struggling. They have to cover those costs. I know Air Peace in Nigeria has stopped with immediate effect flying to the UK. And many Nigerians fly to the UK. So the local airline called Air Peace has stopped. They've sent out a memo this morning with immediate effect. They've temporarily stopped because they cannot meet the costs. So fuel price volatility, it's really, really affecting. And from a logistics point of view, you reach your pricing, you do contract pricing way in advance. So you've priced your contract at X, but now there are these new costs that have come up that the client says, no, we signed this. This is a multi-year deal that we've signed. You can't move away from it. It becomes tricky. So then there is margin erosion there. There is pricing pressure. And you start having really, truly difficult customer conversations. And there is so much risk tension here. The costs have changed drastically, but the contracts don't change because they're multi-year long. And how do you manage that? Yeah. So how do you manage that? Supply chain disruptions. We talked about during COVID, what actually happened, because everything is linked. We ran out of some goods and they to do offshoring and onshoring. Aircrafts are grounded. There is labor strikes. We know you start missing delivery commitments. There is escalation management. Say, I'm not happy. I don't want to speak to you, Jeff. I want to speak to the CEO and so forth. There's this escalation. Then there's compliance and customs risk. As always, in logistics company, we operate under very strict regulations. We carry dangerous goods. They cannot be misdeclared. Customs documentation errors and fines. There are some restricted items like lithium-ion batteries that can explode on aircraft, so they have to be packaged properly. You see, so it's important. Then the fifth risk at a global level is security and cargo theft. This happens globally, including Africa, because we carry in the logistics world, we carry high-value goods that attract organized crimes and syndicates. So we know in some countries, especially in Europe, there is hijackings of trucks that are carrying iPhones from the aircraft to the distribution center. They've been hijacked. So you need to analyze that risk and say, how do you mitigate around that? In warehouses, there's thefts, then fraudulent shipments. So we see all of these. So these were the global risks. So now I want to zero in and come to the Africa-specific risks. The first one, and you agree with me here, is infrastructure constraint, Ashton. Africa really, truly presents physical challenges. We've got poor road networks, limited airport capacity. There's port congestion. Go to a port in Durban if you want to see port congestion. Then go to Maputo Port. You see the congestion. Go to Walfish Bay in Namibia. You see the. Go to Dar es Salaam in Tanzania. Then you see the port congestion. Right now, those ports are also busy because the Strait of Hormuz has been closed. Some of the ships are going the longer route coming to our ports. Are we ready? So if you do a risk assessment, you start saying there is war there. Some of the ships are thinking, are we ready in terms of manpower planning? Are we ready in terms of space? Are we ready in terms of customs? So you start putting all those together. Power outages, Ashton, we went through a tough time with load shedding in South Africa. It happens in Africa. Then, we are on this podcast here. Internet is what we're using. In Africa, there's big challenges around internet instability. And that is one of the risks that we see. And all these have got an impact on transit times, on the routing options. They become limited. The second risk in Africa has to do with political and policy uncertainty. You've touched about this previously. So regulations can choke, and these can change. Example, so you get an import ban. You've imported this, it's no longer allowed. They've put a blanket ban. Currency controls, currencies are very volatile in Africa, so we've got currency controls. Then licensing changes. You are licensed to operate this way, then tomorrow your business is told that you need a different license, So that has got an impact. The third risk in Africa is linked to security and safety risks. I've mentioned globally cargo hijackings, they happen here. So you need armed escort. We've seen on the roads in Johannesburg, on the roads in Cape Town, from the airport, that there's some armed escorts moving high-value consignments. There's break-ins in warehouse, then restrictions on staff movements. Then Africa, one of the biggest headaches that an entrepreneur faces is the customs complexity and bureaucracy. There is lots of bureaucracy, red tape. It takes long to process. They've come up with a one-stop border process, but it doesn't think. I've actually saw a report that was released on Friday, which shows the average times that it takes to clear a truck at a border in different border stations, 24 hours, 36 hours. It's unacceptable. Let's say you're moving to perishable. How do you manage when it's stuck for 36 hours? So it's a problem. There is manual documentation, varying interpretation of rules that go against World Customs Organization, delayed processes and clearances. Then the final one that I want to talk about in terms of Africa risk is around currency and economic volatility. We've got lots of volatile aspects. So the financial instability affects our pricing. How do you price properly? Limited forex availability. How do you do your capex when you don't have foreign currency? It becomes a problem. Inflation. How do you budget? You've come up with your budget, but the inflation has shot up from 5% to 20% to 50% to 75%. Then payments because of that economic volatility. So the entrepreneur should be aware of these risks and then come up with who owns this risk, the mitigating actions that you can take to limit them. Remember, for risk, you are not removing the risk, but it's managing it wisely. How do you manage it wisely? Because it will always be there. So we see that doing business in Africa, Ashton, in general and in logistics, not for the faint-hearted. It's really tough. So you need to have your ducks in a row. You need to know your onions. You need to know the environment that you navigate in. Then you can have success.
So true what you said there, Jeff, towards the end, that you can't eliminate the risk. You can't remove it. but how do you manage it? And I think that's the one way in which the free market that we function in is such a fair place, that each one of our competitors are facing the same risks that we are facing. And it's about how are we managing it versus how are those around us managing it? And how does our faith help us to inform that? It's been a great conversation. I've really enjoyed this. It's been great to get to know you a little bit better and to see a little bit inside of some of the challenges that you face in DHL and as a person. Any closing thoughts from your side?
Just the principle for me remains the same. We must trust God, we must plan well, and we must lead with courage. For me, faith and planning go together. They're hand in glove. If we can understand that, if as one key takeaway is that faith and planning go together. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Jeff. And to all our listeners, have a great rest of this week. It has been great to talk to you again, and God bless you.
Thank you for joining us. This episode of Reframed was brought to you by Ziwani, a community of business leaders who partner together to live out their kingdom calling in the marketplace within Africa. To know more about us, visit our website at ziwani.com. That's ziwani.com.